Rain battered the cracked pavement of the Chicago alleyway, washing away the city's grime, but not the suffocating stench of fear. Dominic Santoro, the undisputed and ruthless head of the Santoro crime syndicate, gripped his customized Kimber 1911. His heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. His 5-year-old son, Leo, had been missing for 6 agonizing hours. Dominic expected a ransom note, a gruesome crime scene, or the smug, bloodied face of a rival cartel boss. Instead, as his men's tactical flashlights pierced the midnight gloom, he found the heir to his bloody empire fast asleep. His small, tear-stained face buried safely in the lap of a shivering, dirt-streaked woman in a torn, oversized coat. The Santoro estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, was usually a fortress of impenetrable silence and calculated order. Tonight, it was a war room drowning in chaos. Dominic Santoro stood at the head of a massive mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as he braced his weight against the polished wood. Screens covering the far wall flickered with live feeds from the city's traffic cameras. Facial recognition software scanning thousands of faces per second. Nothing. Leo was gone. Boss Vincent Costa Dominic's second-in-command and oldest confidant stepped into the room. Vincent's tailored Brioni suit was soaked at the shoulders, his face a grim mask of controlled panic. "We turned the South Side inside out. The Mercer family denies any involvement, and our informants in the O'Reilly crew swear they haven't seen a whisper of the boy. The perimeter guards at the park, they've been dealt with." Dominic didn't flinch at the implication of the guard's fate. His icy blue eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were hollowed out by a father's unparalleled terror. Leo was his only tether to humanity. After his wife Isabella died in a targeted car bombing 3 years ago, Leo became the sole reason Dominic hadn't burned the entire city of Chicago to ash. "I don't care about their denials, Vinny." Dominic's voice was a lethal, quiet rasp that made the heavily armed men in the room stiffen. "I want Silas Mercer hanging by his ankles from the Dearborn Street Bridge. By sunrise, if I don't have my son. You have the police commissioner on the payroll. Use him. Ground every private flight at O'Hare and Midway. Nobody leaves this city." The kidnapping had happened in broad daylight. Leo had been playing near the duck pond at Lincoln Park, surrounded by 3 heavily armed plainclothes bodyguards. It was supposed to be a flawless security detail, but a coordinated distraction, a simulated drive-by shooting on the park's edge, had drawn 2 guards away for 60 seconds. In that minute, a black transit van had clipped the 3rd guard, and Leo was snatched. Hours bled into one another. Dominic rode in the back of a heavily armored Cadillac Escalade, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and rain through the tinted bulletproof glass. His phone remained agonizingly silent. Kidnappers demanded money territory or blood. The silence was what terrified Dominic the most. It suggested a hit, not a hostage situation. At 11:43 p.m., the radio-encrypted channel crackled to life. "Unit 4 to actual," a static-laced voice reported. "We got a hit on the van, burned out under the elevated tracks near West Loop. 2 bodies inside, unidentifiable, completely torched, but no sign of the package." Dominic's blood ran cold. "Give me the exact coordinates." 10 minutes later, the convoy of black SUVs screeched to a halt in a desolate industrial sector of the West Loop. The air smelled of ozone, burning rubber and wet trash. Dominic stepped out into the freezing downpour, his cashmere overcoat instantly heavy with water. The burned van hissed as the rain hit its charred frame. Dominic ignored the police tape and the two corrupt detectives who stepped aside respectfully. "They swapped vehicles here," Vincent said, shining a heavy maglite on the tire tracks leading away from the burnt metal. "Or they went on foot. It's a labyrinth of alleys and abandoned meat-packing warehouses back there." "Tear it apart," Dominic ordered, racking the slide of his Kimber 1911. "Every dumpster, every basement, every cardboard box." They spread out like a pack of hunting wolves. Dominic walked down a narrow claustrophobic alley behind a shuttered dive bar called the Rusty Anchor. Trash cans overflowed, and the rusted fire escapes groaned in the wind. The darkness was absolute, save for the erratic sweeps of his men's flashlights. "Boss, over here!" It was a whisper from one of his men, Tony, standing near a recessed loading dock, 50 yards down the alley. The tone of Tony's voice made Dominic's stomach drop. It wasn't the tone of victory. It was the tone of shock. Dominic sprinted his expensive leather shoes, splashing through murky puddles. He shoved past his men, stepping into the alcove, shielded from the worst of the rain by a corrugated tin overhang. There, sitting on a soaked mattress, surrounded by discarded cardboard, was a woman. She looked like a ghost, her face smeared with soot and dirt, her frame swallowed by a threadbare, oversized men's trench coat. Her wet, dark blonde hair was plastered to her cheeks, and there curled into a tight ball against her chest, draped under the heavy wool of her coat to keep warm, was Leo. The boy was completely unharmed, his chest rising and falling in the deep, even rhythm of sleep. His small fingers were curled tightly into the fabric of the woman's frayed sweater. Dominic froze. The ruthless Mafia Boss, a man who had orchestrated the downfall of empires with a flick of his wrist, felt his knees threaten to buckle. The world funneled down to the sight of his son's rising and falling chest. For a fraction of a second, relief washed over Dominic, so potent it tasted like iron in his mouth. But the relief was instantly violently replaced by a surge of lethal, blinding rage. This woman was a vagrant, a homeless addict perhaps. Had she found his son wandering? Or worse, was she part of the handoff? Dominic raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at the center of the woman's forehead. Around him, 3 of his men mirrored the action red laser sights, painting her pale, dirt-smudged face. "Don't move," Dominic snarled his voice, a low, terrifying growl. "Hand him over." Slowly. The woman didn't scream. She didn't flinch or throw her hands up in surrender. Instead, her reaction was the last thing Dominic expected. She violently shushed him. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, her eyes glaring at him with a ferocious, unrestrained intensity that momentarily stunned the mob boss. She instinctively wrapped her arms tighter around Leo, shielding the sleeping boy's ears from the loud voices. "He finally stopped crying 10 minutes ago. If you wake him up, I swear to God." Dominic lowered his gun a fraction of an inch, utterly bewildered. He stepped closer, stepping fully under the tin overhang. As his eyes adjusted to the shadows, and as Vincent's flashlight caught the periphery of the alcove, the true scene revealed itself. The woman wasn't just holding Leo. She was guarding him. To her right, partially obscured by a toppled garbage can, lay a massive man in a black tactical jacket. He was unconscious, his breathing a wet, ragged wheeze. A heavy iron pipe lay discarded near his limp hand. Dominic's gaze snapped back to the woman. For the first time, he noticed the gruesome details. Her hands clutching his son were trembling and covered in deep scrapes. The left sleeve of her coat was torn open, and a steady stream of dark blood was soaking the wool dripping onto the mattress. In her right hand, hidden beneath the folds of the coat, until now she loosely gripped the jagged, broken neck of a whiskey bottle. The glass was stained red. "Who are you?" Dominic demanded, the hostility draining from his voice, replaced by a cautious, profound confusion. "Carly." She breathed out, her adrenaline clearly crashing. Her head slumped back against the brick wall, her eyes fluttering as the blood loss took its toll. "Are you his father?" "Yes." Carly let out a shaky sigh. "He said his daddy was a giant. You fit the bill." She looked down at the sleeping boy, a soft, sorrowful smile breaking through the grime on her face. "They dumped the van a few blocks away. I was resting here. I saw that man." She weakly nodded toward the unconscious giant, dragging him down the alley. He was trying to put a rag over the kid's mouth. I couldn't just watch. Vincent stepped forward, inspecting the unconscious man. He kicked the man over onto his back. "Boss," Vincent whispered, recognizing the face. "It's one of Mercer's heavy hitters, an enforcer named Griggs." Vincent looked at Carly, then at the broken bottle in her hand, his expression a mix of disbelief and awe. "You took down a 250-pound cartel enforcer with a bottle." "I hit him from behind with a brick first," Carly corrected faintly, her voice growing dangerously weak. "Then he pulled a knife, cut my arm. I grabbed the bottle, aimed for the neck, missed, hit his collarbone. He fell and hit his head on the pipe." She spoke of the brutal violence with a detached numbness, the way someone might describe a minor car accident. She was going into shock. Dominic holstered his weapon. He stepped forward and knelt on the filthy mattress, ignoring the grime that ruined his suit. He reached out his large, calloused hands, gently sliding under his son. As Dominic pulled Leo away, the boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Daddy," Leo mumbled sleepily. "I'm here, mio piccolo leone." Dominic choked out, crushing the boy to his chest, burying his face in Leo's hair. "Daddy's got you." Leo looked over Dominic's shoulder at Carly, who was now slumping dangerously to the side. "Carly protected me, Daddy, like a superhero, but she's leaking." Dominic turned. Carly's eyes were rolling back. The broken bottle slipped from her fingers, shattering on the concrete. "Vinny!" Dominic barked his authoritative command, instantly returning. "Get the boy to the SUV. Tell the driver to lock the doors and blast the heat." Vincent hesitated. "What about her boss and him?" He gestured to Griggs. "Griggs goes to the warehouse at the docks. Wake him up. I'll deal with him personally before dawn." Dominic's voice was devoid of mercy. He looked back at the unconscious woman, bleeding out on the mattress. She had nothing. She looked destitute, broken, and abandoned by the world. Yet when a heavily armed monster had dragged a screaming child through the dark, she hadn't looked away. She had fought a cartel hitman with garbage and bare hands to save a boy she didn't know. Dominic scooped Carly up into his arms. She was alarmingly light, her body frail beneath the heavy, wet coat. "And the woman?" Vincent asked, trailing behind, as Dominic carried her out of the alley. "She comes with us." Dominic stated his tone, leaving no room for argument. "Call Dr. Blackwood. Tell him to set up the surgical suite at the estate. If she dies on our watch, Vinny, I'll hold you personally responsible." The Santoro estate was a sprawling modern fortress, hidden behind high stone walls and a thick canopy of old-growth oak trees. By the time the convoy breached the heavy iron gates, the medical team was already waiting at the private entrance. Carly was whisked away on a gurney, a chaotic blur of IV lines, pressure bandages, and shouting medical staff. Dominic, still covered in alley dirt, and his son's tears refused to leave the medical wing. He sat in a plush leather chair in the corridor, Leo asleep once more in his lap, finally secure in his own home. 2 hours passed. The heavy oak doors to the private medical suite finally opened, and Dr. Aris Blackwood stepped out, pulling down his surgical mask. He was a discreet, highly paid trauma surgeon who had patched up more gunshot wounds for the Santoro syndicate than he cared to count. "She's stabilized, Dominic," Dr. Blackwood said quietly, eyeing the sleeping boy. "It was a deep laceration to the brachial artery. She lost a tremendous amount of blood. Malnutrition and exposure didn't help her odds either. Her body is running on fumes. She's severely underweight, exhausted, and her immune system is practically non-existent. But she's a fighter. The sutures will hold." "Will she wake up?" Dominic asked, his voice low. "She's heavily sedated. She'll sleep through the night. She needs it." Dominic nodded, dismissing the doctor. He carefully carried Leo to his bedroom, a massive toy-filled sanctuary on the 2nd floor. He tucked the boy in, pulling the heavy down comforter up to his chin. He stationed 2 of his best men, heavily armed, inside the room, and 2 more outside the door. He wasn't taking chances ever again. Descending the grand staircase, Dominic found Vincent waiting in the study, pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25. "Griggs is singing Boss," Vincent said, handing Dominic a crystal tumbler. It was Silas Mercer. "Mercer wanted to use the boy as leverage to force you to sign over the Port Authority shipping routes. Griggs panicked when the cops swarmed the extraction point, dumped the van, and tried to drag the kid to a secondary safe house on foot." "Mercer signed his own death warrant," Dominic said, taking a sip of the scotch. The liquid fire did nothing to thaw the ice in his veins. "Assemble the captains. We go to war tomorrow. But first, what did you find out about the woman?" Vincent walked over to the mahogany desk and picked up a manila folder. In the short time Carly had been in surgery, the syndicate's extensive intelligence network had dug up her entire life. "Her name is Carly Hayes, 26 years old." Vincent read his tone unusually subdued. "She's not a junkie, boss. She's not even a drifter by choice. Up until 3 weeks ago, she was a waitress at Joe's All-American Diner over in Evanston. Worked double shifts for 4 years. Dominic frowned, leaning against the fireplace. "What happened?" "Medical debt," Vincent explained. "Her mother died of pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. Carly blew through her savings, maxed out her credit cards, and took out predatory loans to pay for out-of-pocket treatments, trying to save her. When her mother passed, the debt collectors swarmed. Her landlord evicted her illegally a month ago. She had been living in her car, a 2008 Honda Civic, until the transmission blew last week. That's why she was on the street. She had nowhere else to go. No family, no friends with the means to take her in." Dominic stared into his glass. Carly Hayes, a waitress who had lost everything to a broken system, stripped of her home and her dignity. Yet she possessed more courage and honor than the wealthy, powerful men Dominic dealt with daily. She had risked her life, literally taken a knife to the arm, for a stranger's child, asking for nothing in return. "She woke up briefly while the nurses were cleaning her," Vincent added, hesitant. "She was delirious, but she kept asking about the boy. Wanted to make sure the little lion was safe." Dominic's chest tightened. Little Lion. That was what Leo had told her his name meant. "She stays here," Dominic declared, placing his glass on the mantelpiece. "Boss, with all due respect, bringing a civilian into the compound," Vinny started. "I don't care about protocol, Vinny. She saved my blood. That makes her under my protection. Clear out the East Wing guest suite. Fill her closet with clothes. Have the chef prepare whatever she needs. Wipe out her debts by morning. Every single cent. Dominic turned to leave the study, his mind set. He was a man who understood the currency of favors and debts. Silas Mercer owed him blood, and Dominic would collect it with interest. But Carly Hayes had given him a gift that all the money in his illicit empire could never buy back. He walked down the quiet, dimly lit corridor toward the medical wing. Pushing open the door, he entered the sterile room. Carly lay on the hospital bed, an IV drip connecting to her uninjured arm. Her face, now washed clean of the soot and grime, was pale but strikingly beautiful. Delicate features framed by clean golden brown hair that fanned out over the white pillow. Dominic pulled a chair to her bedside and sat in the heavy silence. He was a monster to the world outside these walls. He orchestrated violence-controlled politicians and dealt in shadows. But as he looked at the fragile woman breathing softly in the bed, he knew his life and his son's life had inexorably changed. The waitress had saved the Mafia prince. Now the king would shield the waitress. As the first rays of dawn threatened to break over Lake Michigan, painting the stormy sky in bruised hues of purple and gray, Dominic Santoro made a silent vow. No one would ever touch Carly Hayes again. Carly Hayes drifted up from a suffocating ink-black ocean of exhaustion. The first thing she registered wasn't pain, but a startling, alien softness. Instead of the damp, freezing concrete of the West Loop Alley or the cramped vinyl back seat of her dead Honda Civic, she was enveloped in something that felt like a cloud. The sheets were impossibly smooth, fret linens, though she wouldn't know the brand, only the staggering luxury of them. She inhaled sharply, her eyes snapping open. The air smelled of faint antiseptic and fresh rain, not garbage and ozone. Panic, sharp and immediate, seized her chest. Carly bolted upright, but a searing white-hot agony tore through her left arm. She gasped, falling back against the mountain of pillows. Her vision swam, adjusting to the dim, warm light of a massive, opulent bedroom. High ceilings, intricate crown molding, and heavy velvet curtains drawn tightly against the daylight. "Don't move," a deep, resonant voice commanded from the shadows. Carly froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. From the corner of the room, a man stepped into the ambient light of a bedside lamp. It was the giant from the alley. The father. Dominic Santoro wore a fresh charcoal grey bespoke suit, though he had discarded the tie. The top buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing a glimpse of dark ink creeping up his collarbone. His face was a study in harsh aristocratic angles, a sharp jawline, a straight Roman nose, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to strip away her defenses with a single glance. He looked like a man accustomed to absolute obedience, yet as he looked at her, the lethal edge in his posture was meticulously suppressed. "Where is he?" Carly rasped, her throat dry as sandpaper. "The boy, the little lion." Dominic's expression softened imperceptibly. He poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe on the nightstand and brought it to her lips. She drank greedily, her hands shaking too much to hold the glass herself. "Leo is safe," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet room. "He is sleeping down the hall, unharmed, entirely because of you." Carly let her head fall back, a profound wave of relief washing over her. "The man with the pipe, he was going to hurt him." "That man is no longer a concern," Dominic stated. The chilling finality in his tone sent a shiver down Carly's spine. She remembered the men with guns in the alley, the absolute deference they showed him. She might have been a struggling waitress from Evanston, but she wasn't naive. You didn't roll deep with heavily armed men in matching SUVs unless you were a very specific, very dangerous type of person. "Who are you?" Carly asked, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "Where am I? My name is Dominic Santoro. You are in my home in Lake Forest. You suffered a severe laceration to your brachial artery, Ms. Hayes. You lost over 2 pints of blood and were suffering from acute hypothermia and malnutrition. My private surgeon stitched you up." Carly's eyes widened. Ms. Hayes. He knew her name. "You went through my things," she demanded instinctively, reaching for the pocket of the coat she was no longer wearing. She was dressed in a soft silk nightgown. "I had my men look into the woman who saved my only child," Dominic corrected smoothly, sitting in a heavy leather armchair beside the bed. "I know about the medical debt from your mother's oncology treatments at Northwestern Memorial. I know about the predatory loans, the illegal eviction from your apartment in Rogers Park, and the blown transmission on your Civic. I know that 3 weeks ago you were working double shifts at Joe's Diner." Carly felt stripped bare, a flush of humiliation burning her cheeks. "It's none of your business," she snapped, her defensive instincts flaring. She tried to sit up again, gritting her teeth against the pain in her arm. "I appreciate the medical help, Mr. Santoro, but I don't need your pity. Where are my clothes? I'm leaving." Dominic didn't move, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are in no condition to walk to the bathroom, let alone leave this estate, and you have nowhere to go." "I'll figure it out. I always do," Carly shot back, her chin trembling despite her fierce glare. "I don't belong here, and I definitely don't belong mixed up with whatever it is you do." Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his massive hands clasped together. He stared at her, assessing the raw, unbroken spirit of a woman the world had systematically ground into the dirt. "You owe a collective sum of $84,000 to various creditors, hospitals, and unsavory lenders, Carly," Dominic said quietly. "As of 6 o'clock this morning, those accounts have been settled in full. The balances are 0. Carly stopped breathing. She stared at him, her mind completely blank. "What? The debts are paid. The transmission on your car is irrelevant because the vehicle has been scrapped. A new bank account has been opened in your name at Chase Bank with a starting balance of $500,000. Dominic listed the life-altering facts as casually as if he were reading a grocery list. "It is a fraction of what a bodyguard detail would have cost me over the years, and they failed to do what you did with a broken whiskey bottle." Tears welled up in Carly's eyes, hot and fast. Anger, disbelief, and a crushing, overwhelming sense of shock collided in her chest. "You can't just buy me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't save your son for a reward. I saved him because he was a terrified child. You don't owe me anything. I owe you my life." Dominic corrected, his blue eyes blazing with a sudden fierce intensity. "Leo is my life. In my world, a debt of blood is absolute. I protect those who protect mine." Before Carly could argue, the heavy oak door creaked open. A small figure in superhero pajamas peeked around the frame. Leo's dark eyes, mirroring his father's, locked onto Carly. "Carly," the boy whispered, his voice incredibly fragile. Dominic's posture instantly shifted from commanding mob boss to tender father. "Come here, Piccolo," he encouraged gently. Leo padded across the Persian rug, clutching a worn, stuffed bear. He ignored his father's outstretched arm and went straight to the side of the bed. He looked at Carly's heavily bandaged arm, his lower lip trembling. "Does it hurt?" Leo asked, reaching out a tiny finger to lightly touch the white gauze. Carly's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of a second. She swallowed the lump in her throat and offered a warm, genuine smile. "Only a little bit, buddy." The doctor fixed it right up. Leo climbed onto the edge of the mattress, carefully avoiding her injured arm, and pressed his small head against her uninjured shoulder. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled into the silk of her nightgown. "The loud man was pulling me again. But then I remembered you hit him with the glass." Dominic watched the interaction, a heavy silence hanging over him. He met Carly's eyes over his son's head. The plea in the ruthless syndicate leader's gaze was unmistakable. Stay for him. Carly looked down at the traumatized 5-year-old, clinging to her like a lifeline. She had lost her mother, her home, and her livelihood. She was utterly alone in the world, and yet in this sprawling, terrifying fortress of a home she was suddenly needed. "Okay," Carly whispered, wrapping her good arm around the boy, her eyes locked defensively on Dominic. "I'll stay until he feels safe again." Dominic gave a single curt nod. "Whatever you need, Carly. The house is yours." 2 weeks bled into 3. Autumn descended hard on Chicago, stripping the oak trees bare and turning the winds whipping off Lake Michigan into icy blades. Inside the Santoro estate, however, time moved at a strange, insulated pace. Carly's arm healed quickly under the meticulous care of Dr. Blackwood, leaving a jagged, angry scar that snaked from her bicep to her elbow. Physically, she was recovering. She had gained back some of the weight she'd lost on the streets, her cheeks filling out, and her skin regaining a healthy, sun-kissed glow. But mentally, Carly was living in a state of constant whiplash. She was a diner waitress, thrust into a world of incomprehensible wealth and chilling shadows. Her closet in the East Wing guest suite had been stocked with cashmere sweaters, tailored slacks and silk blouses by a high-end personal shopper. She insisted on doing her own laundry, a habit that deeply confused the estate's sprawling domestic staff. She felt like an imposter playing dress-up in a very expensive, very dangerous dollhouse. Her anchor, however, was Leo. The boy suffered from severe night terrors, waking up screaming about the dark van and the heavy hands dragging him away. Dominic, despite his terrifying reputation in the city, was agonizingly patient with his son, spending hours sitting by his bed. But it was Carly who Leo sought out during the day. Carly taught him how to bake chocolate chip cookies from scratch in the cavernous industrial-grade kitchen, covering the stainless steel countertops in flour, while the head chef watched in silent horror. She read to him in the glass-walled conservatory, letting the boy fall asleep with his head on her lap, a safe recreation of the terrifying night they met. And Dominic was always watching. He observed them from the doorway of his study, or from the terrace overlooking the gardens. Carly felt the weight of his gaze constantly. It wasn't predatory. It was intensely analytical, filled with a simmering unspoken gratitude and something darker, something she couldn't quite name. They rarely spoke of the outside world. Dominic left the estate in armored convoys early in the morning and returned late at night. Sometimes he came back, smelling of expensive cigars and rain. Other times, like a Tuesday in late October, he returned smelling of copper and bleach, his knuckles bruised and his jaw set in a rigid line of fury. The illusion of safety shattered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Carly was in the library, a massive 2-story room filled with leather-bound first editions. She was looking for a specific adventure book Leo had requested. The heavy oak doors were ajar, and voices drifted down the hallway from Dominic's study. "Carmine is retaliating." Vincent Costa's voice filtered through, laced with tension. Carly froze her hand, hovering over a dusty spine. Taking out Silas was a clean hit, boss, but we knew his Uncle Carmine wouldn't let the disrespect stand. He's called in muscle from Detroit. The feds are sniffing around the port shipments, and Carmine just firebombed 2 of our warehouses in the South Loop. Carly pressed her back against the bookshelves, her breath hitching. She had known in the abstract that Dominic was a criminal. The armed guards patrolling the perimeter with automatic rifles slung over their chests made that obvious. But hearing the casual mention of clean hits and firebombed warehouses made the reality violently concrete. "Let Carmine throw his tantrums." Dominic's voice was low, devoid of panic but vibrating with lethal intent. "Double the perimeter guards here. No one gets within a mile of the gates. If a stray dog wanders too close, I want it vetted. You understand me, Vinny?" "Yes, boss, but Carmine is old school. He believes in blood for blood. He knows why we hit Silas. He knows about the kidnapping attempt. Word on the street is, he's looking for the vulnerability." "I have no vulnerabilities." Dominic snapped, the sound of glass shattering against a brick fireplace, echoing through the hall. Carly stepped out of the library, her heart pounding. She walked directly down the hall, the thick carpet silencing her footsteps. She pushed the heavy door to the study fully open. Dominic and Vincent snapped their heads toward her. Vincent instantly dropped his hand to his hip, a reflex born of violence, before recognizing her and stepping back. Dominic's expression hardened, a mask of cold stone sliding over his features. "Vinny, give us a minute," Dominic commanded. Vincent nodded to Carly, a grim look of respect on his face, and exited the room, pulling the door shut behind him. Carly stood in the center of the opulent study, surrounded by priceless art and mahogany. "You said we were safe here." Dominic walked to the wet bar, pouring a heavy measure of scotch, his back to her. "You are safe. This estate is impenetrable." "Don't lie to me," Carly said, her voice trembling but refusing to break. She crossed the room, closing the distance between them. "I heard, Vincent. A man named Carmine is coming after you because you killed the man who tried to take Leo. You started a war." Dominic turned slowly. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of the monster the rest of Chicago feared. But when he spoke, his voice was a ragged whisper. "I ended the threat to my son," Dominic corrected, stepping closer to her. He towered over her, radiating a dangerous magnetic heat. "Silas Mercer orchestrated the kidnapping. I orchestrated his funeral. That is the world I live in, Carly. That is the reality of who I am." "And what happens when this Carmine figures out that Leo's new favorite babysitter is living in your house?" Carly demanded, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "What happens when he realizes you care about what happens to me?" Dominic reached out his hand, hovering inches from her face before his knuckles gently grazed her cheek. The touch was startlingly tender, a massive contrast to the violence they were discussing. "No one knows you exist," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave intimate and fierce. "To the outside world, Carly Hayes vanished the night the van burned. I erased every trace of you from the system. You are a ghost, safe within these walls." "I don't want to be a ghost," Carly whispered, stepping back from his touch, terrified by how much she leaned into it. "I survived the streets, Dominic. I survived losing my mother, losing my home, I won't survive being collateral damage in a mafia war. Dominic's jaw tightened. I will burn this entire city to the bedrock before I let a single soul lay a hand on you or my son. You have my word. Your word is written in blood, Carly shot back, turning toward the door, and blood washes away. She left the study, her mind reeling. The golden ketch she had been living in suddenly felt incredibly small, and the storm gathering outside its walls was darker and deadlier than she could have ever imagined. She had to make a choice, run back into the freezing anonymity of a world that had abandoned her, or stay and face the fire with the ruthless mafia boss and the little boy who had stolen her heart. The tension inside the Lake Forest compound hung in the air like damp gunpowder. For 3 days following their argument in the study, Carly actively avoided Dominic. She spent her hours sequestered in the East Wing or the conservatory with Leo, her mind spinning with exit strategies she knew she would never execute. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. She had nowhere to go, and the thought of leaving the traumatized 5-year-old boy shattered her heart. Outside, the storm of Carmine's wrath battered the syndicate. News trickled in through the estate's hushed staff. A legitimate front, a highly profitable logistics company on Wacker Drive, had been raided by the feds. 2 of Dominic's captains had barely survived a drive-by shooting outside Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse on Rush Street. The city of Chicago was bleeding, and the bleeding was inching closer to the fortified gates of the estate. It happened on a Tuesday night, exactly at 2 a.m. Carly was awake, staring at the intricate plasterwork of her ceiling, listening to the relentless November rain lashing against the reinforced glass. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the estate's massive HVAC system died. The heavy, suffocating silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the emergency backup generators failed to engage. The estate plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. Carly sat up, her instincts honed by years of living on the edge of disaster screaming at her. The perimeter security lights, which usually bathed the sprawling lawns in a harsh white glow, were dead. More terrifyingly, the Dobermans patrolling the inner gardens didn't bark. A sharp, muted crack echoed from the west wing, the unmistakable sound of a suppressed gunshot. Carly didn't hesitate. She threw off the heavy silk comforter, ignoring the sharp twinge in her healing arm, and sprinted barefoot into the hallway. The corridor was a cavern of shadows. She knew the layout by heart now, navigating blindly toward Leo's room. "Leo," she whispered frantically, pushing open his heavy oak door. The 2 guards usually stationed inside were gone. A cold wind blew through the room. The Juliet balcony doors had been expertly jimmied open. Panic seized Carly's throat as she scrambled toward the bed. It was empty. "Carly!" A tiny, terrified voice whimpered from inside the massive walk-in closet. She dove into the closet, feeling her way through rows of tiny tailored suits and toys, until her hands brushed against a trembling shoulder. Leo was curled behind a heavy wooden toy chest. Carly dragged him into her arms, pressing his face into her neck to muffle any sound. "I've got you, little lion," she breathed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You have to be perfectly quiet, like a mouse." Heavy tactical boots thudded against the hardwood floor of the bedroom. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, sweeping over the unmade bed. "Target is not in the bed. Sweep the adjoining rooms," a gruff, unfamiliar voice ordered over a radio. Carly squeezed her eyes shut. The compound was supposed to be a fortress. The security system was military-grade, designed by former intelligence contractors. To breach the perimeter silence, the dogs kill the interior guards and bypass the generators. It required an intimate, catastrophic knowledge of the estate. It required an inside man. Before the intruders could reach the closet doors, a deafening roar shook the entire wing. It wasn't a suppressed weapon. It was the concussive, terrifying blast of Dominic's customized Kimber, 1911. "Get away from my son's room." Dominic's voice boomed, a primal, earth-shattering sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Gunfire erupted in the hallway, a chaotic, blinding exchange of flashing muzzles and shattering drywall. Carly covered Leo's ears, burying him under a pile of winter coats. She peeked through the slats of the closet door. In the hallway, the emergency tactical lights finally flickered to life, bathing the scene in a sickly, pulsing red glow. Dominic moved like a phantom. He was dressed in dark sweatpants and a t-shirt, blood smearing his shoulder, but his aim was devastatingly precise. He dropped 2 men in black tactical gear before they could even pivot. But there were too many. 4 more poured up the grand staircase. Dominic was pinned behind a marble pillar, reloading with practiced lethal speed. Then the unthinkable happened. From the shadows of the opposing hallway, Vincent Costa stepped out. He wasn't holding a weapon aimed at the intruders. His gun was drawn, his hand shaking violently, and the barrel was pointed directly at Dominic's back. "Drop it, boss!" Vincent choked out his voice, cracking with a devastating mix of grief and betrayal. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Dominic froze. Slowly he turned his head, his eyes locking onto his oldest friend, the man who had been his second in command for over a decade. The realization hit Dominic like a physical blow. The disabled cameras, the poisoned dogs, the exact window of vulnerability. "Vinny," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet calm amidst the ringing echoes of gunfire. "What have you done? Carmine has my sister Maria." Vincent sobbed, tears tracking down his rugged face. "He took her from her apartment in Lincoln Park. He sent me a video, Dominic. He started cutting off her fingers. He said if I didn't give him the codes, he would mail her to me in pieces. I had no choice." The remaining hitmen filed into the hallway, their weapons trained on the surrounded Mafia Boss. The leader, a scarred man with a Detroit accent, stepped forward. "Carmine sends his regards, Santoro. You should have paid the toll at the port." Dominic didn't look at the hitmen. His eyes remained locked on Vincent. "You bring rats into my home, Vinny, where my son sleeps." "They just want you, boss," Vincent pleaded. "They swore they wouldn't the boy." "And you believed a man who mutilates women?" Dominic sneered, his imposing frame vibrating with unchecked rage. Carly couldn't watch anymore. Dominic was going to die right in front of her, and then they would find Leo. She looked around the closet in the dim red light. Her eyes landed on a heavy, solid brass telescope Dominic had bought Leo for his birthday, still sitting in its heavy wooden presentation box. She hefted the solid brass tube. It was incredibly heavy. She looked at Leo. "Stay here. Do not move." Carly pushed open the closet door. The intruders were so focused on Dominic that they didn't hear her bare feet on the carpet. She stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, right behind the hit man closest to the door. With a guttural scream, Carly swung the heavy brass telescope like a baseball bat, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into the arc. The brass connected with the back of the hitman's skull with a sickening crack. The man crumpled instantly, his rifle clattering to the floor. The sudden distraction was all the opening Dominic needed. He lunged out from behind the pillar, tackling the Detroit leader to the ground, using the man's body as a shield, as the remaining hitmen opened fire. Carly dove back into the bedroom, dragging the dropped assault rifle with her. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she fumbled with the safety. Her hands slick with sweat, and pointed the barrel blindly around the doorframe, squeezing the trigger. The recoil bruised her shoulder, the deafening automatic fire spraying wildly into the ceiling and walls. It was inaccurate, desperate, and entirely unexpected. The remaining hitmen scrambled for cover, shouting in confusion. Dominic, having neutralized the leader, retrieved his weapon and systematically eliminated the two distracted gunmen. Silence slammed back into the hallway, heavy and suffocating. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite, pulverized drywall, and copper. Vincent still stood at the end of the hall, his gun lowered, staring at the carnage in absolute horror. He looked at Carly, trembling with the assault rifle, and then at Dominic, who was rising from the floor, his face a terrifying mask of judgment. "Boss," Vincent whispered, dropping to his knees, his gun clattering to the floor. "Do it. I betrayed the family. I broke the oath." Dominic walked slowly toward Vincent, his boots crunching on broken glass and bullet casings. He raised his Kimber 1911, aiming it squarely at Vincent's forehead. Carly held her breath, leaning against the doorframe, her heart aching. This was the monster the world feared. This was the inevitable end of betrayal in their world. Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. He stared down at the man who had stood by him at his wedding, the man who had carried his wife's casket. "You brought death to my child's door, Vinny." Dominic whispered, the pain in his voice more profound than the anger. Slowly, agonizingly, Dominic lowered the gun. "Get up," Dominic ordered. Vincent blinked, stunned. "Dominic! Get up!" Dominic roared. "You have exactly 2 hours to get out of Chicago. Take a jet from the private strip. Go to Europe. Disappear. If I ever see your face in this city again, if I ever hear your name whispered on the wind, I will carve your heart out myself. Now go, before I change my mind." Vincent scrambled to his feet, weeping openly, and fled down the stairs, vanishing into the night. Dominic stood alone in the ruined hallway, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies. He looked exhausted, stripped of his invincibility. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the bedroom door. Carly stepped out, letting the heavy rifle drop to the floor. She walked toward him, ignoring the carnage. She reached him, and without a word, wrapped her uninjured arm around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. Dominic let out a shuddering breath, his massive arms coming around her, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair. "Are you hurt?" he asked roughly. "No," Carly whispered. "Leo is safe. He's in the closet." Dominic pulled back, framing her face with his large, calloused hands. "You fought for us again, a waitress with a telescope against heavily armed killers." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained haunted. "What am I going to do with you, Carly Hayes?" "You're going to finish this," Carly said fiercely, meeting his gaze. "You're going to end Carmine. And then you're going to change." The retaliation was swift, absolute, and utterly silent. Dominic didn't send an army of hitmen into the streets. He didn't firebomb Carmine's clubs. Instead, he used the weapon that truly ruled Chicago leverage. By sunrise, the financial backbone of Carmine's empire had been severed. Dominic's accountants, operating out of a secure bunker in the Loop, executed a hostile takeover of the legitimate holding companies that laundered Carmine's money. He blackmailed the corrupt alderman in Carmine's pocket, releasing a dossier of evidence to a federal judge that ensured Carmine's political protection vanished overnight. At 3 p.m. the following day, Dominic met Carmine in the opulent, empty ballroom of the Drake Hotel. Dominic didn't bring muscle. He brought a single manila folder. Carmine, an aging, bitter man, sneered at the lone mafia boss. "You think you can bankrupt me, Santoro? I have cash buried in the walls." Dominic tossed the folder onto the table between them. "That is the deed to your estate in Naples, Italy. A private jet is waiting at Midway. You will board it in exactly 1 hour. You will never return to the United States. If you refuse the federal indictments in that folder, go to the U.S. attorney and you spend the rest of your miserable life in ADX Florence. If you try to run, my men will find you, and I will not be as merciful as I was with Vincent." Carmine opened the folder, his face draining of color. The empire he had built over 40 years had been dismantled in 12 hours by a man operating with cold, terrifying precision. Carmine looked at Dominic, realizing he was no longer looking at a rival mobster. He was looking at an untouchable king. Carmine took the deal. The war ended without another shot fired. 3 weeks later, the Lake Forest compound was quiet, the damage from the breach fully repaired. The first heavy snow of December had blanketed the estate, turning it into a serene, glittering wonderland. Carly stood in the kitchen, carefully icing a batch of gingerbread cookies. Her arm was completely healed, leaving only a silver line as a reminder of the night that changed her life. She felt a presence behind her before she heard the footsteps. Dominic stepped into the kitchen, wearing a thick wool sweater that softened his imposing frame. He leaned against the marble island, watching her work. The heavy burden of his empire seemed to have lifted slightly from his shoulders. "The transition is complete," Dominic said quietly. "I've handed the daily operations of the syndicate over to the captains. I maintain the oversight, but my focus is shifting. Legitimate logistics, real estate, technology." Carly paused, holding the piping bag. "You're stepping back." "I am stepping out of the shadows," Dominic corrected, moving closer to her. "I cannot be the man who ordered hits and burned warehouses if I am going to be the father Leo deserves. And I cannot be that man if I want a chance. With you." Carly turned to face him, her heart doing a familiar, frantic flutter. Over the past month, they had danced around the undeniable gravity pulling them together. They had shared quiet moments in the conservatory, unspoken understandings, and a mutual devotion to the little boy who tied them together. "I told you I wouldn't survive being collateral damage, Dominic," Carly said softly, her eyes searching his. "You will never be collateral damage," Dominic vowed, reaching out to gently take the icing bag from her hands, placing it on the counter. He took her hands in his. "You are the fiercest protector I have ever known. You walked into this dark world and brought light into it. You saved my son in that alley, but you saved me in this house." He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. "I am a man with a dark past, Carly. I cannot erase the blood on my ledger, but I can build a future that is worthy of you. Stay with me. Be my partner. Be his mother." Tears pricked Carly's eyes. She thought of the cold, lonely nights in her broken car, the suffocating weight of debt, the feeling of being entirely invisible to the world. And then she looked at the powerful, terrifying, fiercely loving man standing before her, offering her an empire and a family. "You're a very stubborn man, Dominic Santoro," Carly whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I am a man who knows what he wants," Dominic murmured, leaning in. When their lips met, it wasn't a spark. It was a slow, burning ember catching fire. It was a promise of protection, of loyalty, and of a love forged in the crucible of violence and survival. Carly wrapped her arms around his neck, finally letting herself surrender to the safety she had fought so hard to find. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the living room, followed by a squeal of laughter. Dominic and Carly broke apart, smiling. They walked together out of the kitchen. In the center of the massive decorated living room, Leo was tangled in a string of Christmas lights, wrestling playfully with a new golden retriever puppy Dominic had bought him. Leo looked up, his face flushed with pure, unadulterated joy. He saw them standing together in the doorway, Dominic's hand resting securely on the small of Carly's back. "Carly, Daddy, look what he did!" Leo laughed, pointing at the mischievous dog. Carly knelt down, helping the boy untangle the lights, while Dominic watched from above, his heart finally whole. The Mafia Boss had found his son, sleeping on a homeless woman's lap, expecting to find a victim. Instead, he had found his queen, and a love that would rule them all. The journey from the cold, blood-stained pavement of a Chicago alley to the gilded halls of the Santoro estate was a collision of two vastly different worlds. Carly Hayes, a destitute waitress with nothing left to lose, proved that true strength isn't measured by wealth or firepower, but by the courage to protect the innocent. Dominic Santoro, a ruthless crime boss ruling from the shadows, discovered that the most powerful empire a man can build is a family bound by unconditional love and unwavering loyalty. Together they transformed a legacy of violence into a future of hope, proving that redemption can be found in the most unexpected places. If you were captivated by Carly's bravery and Dominic's fierce devotion, please like this story, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic narratives that prove love conquers all.